The most dangerous opponent isn't the one who attacks you directly. It's the one who makes you destroy yourself. Throughout history, the true masters of power never needed to strike the fatal blow. Instead, they created scenarios where their enemies self-destructed through their own impulsive actions and fatal errors. Imagine having the ability to step back and watch as your competitors, rivals, or enemies sabotage their own success. This isn't fiction. It's a psychological strategy that dates back centuries to Machiavelli himself, who understood that human weakness is the ultimate weapon. You've likely experienced this already. The coworker who can't help but interrupt during meetings, eventually alienating everyone. The business rival who overextends themselves trying to outdo you. The argumentative person who discredits themselves through emotional outbursts. What if I told you these moments aren't accidents, but engineered outcomes? What if you could position yourself so strategically that others fall into predictable traps of their own making? Today, I'm going to share the most powerful psychological strategy that's hiding in plain sight, the art of making others destroy themselves. You'll learn how to recognize self-destructive tendencies in others, set the stage for their downfall, and maintain complete deniability throughout the process. This isn't about being malicious. It's about understanding human nature so deeply that you can predict behavior and create scenarios where the right choice for you becomes the only choice for them. By the end of this video, you'll see social dynamics through an entirely new lens, one that reveals how the true masters of strategy win without ever appearing to fight. Before I reveal these Machiavellian principles, understand this. Once you see how power truly operates, you cannot unsee it. This knowledge will fundamentally shift how you read people, situations, and the games being played around you every day. If you're not ready for that level of awareness, stop watching now. For everyone else, pay attention to every word. Number 1. The mirror maze technique. Have you ever noticed how some people seem completely blind to their own flaws? They'll criticize others for the exact same behaviors they exhibit themselves. This blindness isn't just common, it's universal. We all have blind spots when it comes to our own shortcomings. But what if you could use this universal human trait to your advantage? Think about the last time someone gave you direct criticism. What was your first reaction? For most people, it's immediate defensiveness. A barrier goes up and learning shuts down. Direct confrontation rarely changes minds. Instead, it entrenches people deeper in their positions. This is why telling someone they're wrong often backfires spectacularly. But what if there was another way, a method so subtle that people confront their own flaws willingly, without you ever having to point them out? What if you could create situations where your opponents face the very weaknesses they've been denying, forcing them to either acknowledge these flaws or double down on behaviors that ultimately hurt them? The most brilliant strategists throughout history understood that the most powerful mirror isn't the one you hold up to someone, it's the one they discover on their own. Imagine you're dealing with a colleague who constantly interrupts others during meetings. Instead of directly criticizing this behavior, you could organize a discussion where turn-taking is explicitly structured. When they inevitably interrupt despite the clear framework, everyone notices the violation, not just you. The mirror appears naturally, reflecting their behavior back to them through the reactions of the entire group. This is strategy number 1 of 5, the mirror maze technique. Rather than opposing someone directly, you create situations where they must confront their own flaws. The key is strategic positioning of mirrors in their path. These mirrors can take many forms, carefully phrased questions that expose contradictions in their thinking, opportunities that reveal their limitations, or scenarios that naturally highlight their insecurities. The power comes from forcing them to either acknowledge these weaknesses or double down on denial. This self-confrontation triggers a cascade of poor decisions as they scramble to preserve their self-image. The beauty of this approach is that you never have to be the bearer of bad news. You simply create the conditions where they must face their own reflection. For example, if you're dealing with someone who claims expertise they don't possess, don't challenge them directly. Instead, create a situation where they must demonstrate this expertise publicly. Their performance will speak for itself. Or if someone consistently takes credit for others' work, design collaborative projects with clear individual accountability. The evidence of their behavior becomes visible to everyone without you having to say a word. The mirror maze technique works because it leverages a psychological principle called cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort people feel when their actions contradict their beliefs about themselves. When faced with this discomfort, people will either change their behavior or distort their reality further to avoid facing the truth. By creating these mirror moments, you give your opponents only two choices: grow from the reflection or destroy themselves trying to avoid it. Either outcome serves your purpose without you ever having to engage in direct conflict. Remember, the most effective strategy isn't about destroying your opponents. It's about creating conditions where they must either improve or self-destruct. The mirror maze technique puts this power in your hands. Number 2, the pressure release valve strategy. Everyone has a breaking point. Even the most composed person has moments when their mask slips, revealing what's truly beneath. You've seen it happen. The usually calm executive who suddenly explodes during a high-stakes meeting. The calculated competitor who makes a rash decision when the pressure mounts. The measured colleague who sends that regrettable email late at night. These moments aren't random. They follow patterns as predictable as the laws of physics. Pressure builds in everyone. The only difference is where, when, and how it eventually releases. Some people crack under deadline stress. Others lose composure when their authority is questioned. Some break when their competence is subtly doubted. These pressure points are as unique as fingerprints, but they exist in everyone, including your most formidable opponents. What if you could map these fault lines in others? What if you could understand exactly what triggers their worst decisions without ever having to push them yourself? What if the most devastating pressure came not from your actions, but from situations you merely helped arrange? The masters of strategy throughout history knew a fundamental truth. Direct confrontation reveals your intentions, but environmental pressure reveals your opponent's weaknesses. This brings us to strategy number 2 of 5, the pressure release valve strategy. This approach requires you to identify people's pressure points, the specific topics, situations, or triggers that cause them to lose their composure and make self-sabotaging choices. The genius of this strategy lies in its indirectness. Instead of applying pressure yourself, you create environments where these pressure points are naturally activated while you remain seemingly uninvolved. When someone feels their control slipping, they often overcompensate in ways that damage their own position. For example, if you know a rival becomes defensive when deadlines tighten, you might support a team initiative for more aggressive timelines. You're not targeting them specifically. You're creating conditions where they're likely to reveal their weaknesses to everyone. Or perhaps you've noticed a competitor makes poor decisions when they feel their status is threatened. Rather than challenging their status directly, you might elevate someone else near them, creating a situation where they feel compelled to reassert their importance, often in ways that backfire. The key is understanding psychological fault lines deeply enough to predict exactly how and when someone will crack. This requires careful observation. Pay attention to small changes in body language, tone, or behavior when certain topics arise. Notice patterns in when someone makes their worst decisions or shows uncharacteristic emotion. What makes them rush? What makes them defensive? What makes them overcommit? These are the pressure points you can map. Remember that pressure doesn't just reveal character, it reveals strategy. Under pressure, people fall back on their default patterns rather than their best thinking. By understanding these default patterns, you gain predictive power over their future actions. The beauty of this approach is its complete deniability. You never directly attack or undermine. You simply understand the psychological terrain so well that you can anticipate how others will navigate it and where they'll likely fall. Use this knowledge carefully. The goal isn't to cause unnecessary suffering, but to create situations where people either manage pressure effectively or reveal themselves as unable to handle the challenges they've claimed to be equal to. By mastering the pressure release valve strategy, you'll develop an almost supernatural ability to predict when others will self-destruct, not because you pushed them, but because you understood exactly where their internal pressure would naturally build and eventually release. If you're still here, you already think differently. That alone sets you apart. Now, sharpen your edge. Hit subscribe. This is how you stay 10 steps ahead in a world that rewards the silent strategist. Number 3. The empty stage method. Nature abhors a vacuum. You've seen this principle play out countless times in your daily life. The moment someone steps away from their desk, another person glances at what they were working on. When a leader falls silent in a meeting, voices rush to fill the gap. When an important role opens up, people immediately begin positioning themselves as the replacement. This natural tendency of humans to fill empty spaces isn't just a curiosity, it's one of the most powerful forces in social dynamics. But have you ever considered that deliberately creating these empty spaces might reveal more about others than any question you could ask? That strategic absence might accomplish more than constant presence ever could? The greatest strategists understand that sometimes the most revealing move is no move at all. Think about it. When you're constantly engaged, expressing opinions and marking your territory, others are responding to your actions. But what happens when you suddenly create an empty stage? Everyone's true motivations rush forward, often in ways they wouldn't if you remained at the center. I'm about to share with you strategy number 3 of 5. The empty stage method. This technique works because it leverages a fundamental human instinct, the drive to fill voids, claim territory, and seize opportunity. By strategically withdrawing from certain situations, you create a space where others compete for attention or control. This competition often reveals their true motives and capabilities while exposing them to scrutiny they wouldn't face if you remained active in the situation. Meanwhile, your calculated absence positions you as the measured observer rather than an active participant in their potential downfall. For example, if you're in a meeting where a controversial proposal is being discussed, instead of immediately offering your perspective, maintain thoughtful silence. Watch as others rush to establish positions, often revealing alliances, hidden agendas, and insecurities they would have kept concealed had you spoken first. Or perhaps you're managing a team with someone who constantly undermines your authority. Rather than confronting them directly, you might temporarily delegate leadership of a challenging project. Their performance in your absence will either expose their limitations to the entire team or force them to rise to a level of responsibility they weren't prepared for. The empty stage method requires patience and timing. You must recognize precisely when your withdrawal will create the maximum revealing effect. This isn't about abandoning responsibilities. It's about strategic absence at moments when presence would actually tell you less about those around you. The true power of this approach comes from the information it generates. While others are busy filling the vacuum you've created, you're gathering invaluable intelligence about their capabilities, intentions, and breaking points. Who steps up constructively? Who descends into power struggles? Who reveals hidden talents? Who exposes their weaknesses? This technique also carries another significant advantage. It creates natural consequences without your direct involvement. If someone claims they could do your job better, The empty stage method gives them enough rope to either prove themselves or demonstrate their limitations, all without you having to challenge them directly. Remember that timing is everything with this strategy. Deploy it too often, and you appear absent or disengaged. Use it too rarely, and you miss crucial opportunities to see others as they truly are, not as they present themselves when you're actively involved. The empty stage method turns observation into your superpower. While others rush to fill the vacuum you've created, competing for attention and control, you're gathering the most valuable currency in strategic interaction, truth about who people really are when given the opportunity to show themselves. By mastering this technique, you'll never again need to wonder about hidden agendas or concealed capabilities. You'll simply create the empty stage and watch as others reveal everything you need to know. Number 4. The confirmation coin flip. Have you ever tried to change someone's deeply held belief with facts and evidence? If you have, you've probably noticed something strange. Often, the more proof you provide, the more firmly they cling to their original position. This seemingly irrational behavior has puzzled people for centuries. Why would someone reject clear evidence that contradicts their beliefs? The answer lies in a fascinating quirk of human psychology called confirmation bias. We don't simply observe reality objectively. We actively filter information to support what we already believe. Like a magnet, our minds attract evidence that confirms our existing viewpoints while repelling anything that challenges them. This tendency is so powerful that people will interpret identical information in completely opposite ways depending on their pre-existing beliefs. The same economic data can be seen as proof of success or failure. The same scientific study can be viewed as groundbreaking or flawed. The same statement can be interpreted as wisdom or foolishness. But what if this psychological tendency, this bug in human reasoning, could become a feature in your strategic approach? What if, instead of fighting against this bias, you could use it to reveal how people sabotage themselves through their own flawed thinking? This brings us to strategy number 4 of 5, the confirmation coin flip. This technique leverages the understanding that people actively seek validation for their existing beliefs, often to their own detriment. The approach is elegantly simple. Present information in ways that can be interpreted through multiple lenses, allowing others to choose the interpretation that confirms their biases, even when that interpretation leads them astray. Unlike manipulation, which pushes people toward false conclusions, this technique simply creates space for people's own confirmation bias to operate naturally. For example, if you're dealing with someone who believes they're being overlooked for promotion due to office politics rather than performance issues, you might share stories about colleagues who succeeded through both excellent work and strategic relationship building. Their confirmation bias will likely cause them to focus entirely on the relationship aspect while ignoring the performance component, revealing their blind spot not just to you, but potentially to themselves. Or perhaps you're negotiating with someone who's overly confident about their position. Instead of directly challenging this confidence, you might present market data that contains both optimistic and cautionary indicators. Their bias will often lead them to fixate on the positive signals while dismissing the warnings, potentially leading to overreach that weakens their position. The power of this strategy comes from its deniability and ethical foundation. You're not feeding people false information. You're presenting reality in its full complexity and allowing their own cognitive filters to create their interpretation. The responsibility for their conclusions remains entirely their own. This technique requires careful observation to implement effectively. You must first understand someone's existing beliefs and biases. What do they already believe about themselves, their abilities, their situation? What evidence do they habitually notice or ignore? Which interpretations do they leap to first? With this understanding, you can present information in ways that allow their confirmation bias room to operate. The key is maintaining plausible alternative interpretations while knowing which one their bias will likely select. Remember that confirmation bias works in predictable patterns. People tend to attribute success to their skills and failure to external circumstances. They interpret ambiguous information as supporting their existing views. They remember details that confirm their beliefs while forgetting those that contradict them. By understanding these patterns, you can anticipate how someone will interpret information before you even share it, giving you remarkable predictive power over their reactions and decisions. The confirmation coin flip isn't about manipulation. It's about creating clarity. When people's biases lead them to self-defeating interpretations and decisions, they reveal both their thinking patterns and their vulnerabilities, not just to you, but often to everyone watching. This revelation either catalyzes growth or demonstrates limitations, but either outcome serves truth. Number 5. The boundary inversion principle. Think about the last time someone told you that you couldn't do something. What was your immediate reaction? For many people, restrictions trigger resistance, a natural push against perceived constraints. This psychological response is so predictable that parents, managers, and negotiators have observed it for centuries. Tell someone not to touch a wet paint sign, and their fingers start itching. But what if there was a way to use this natural resistance to create even more effective boundaries? What if, instead of building walls that people instinctively want to climb, you could design spaces where others willingly construct their own limitations? What if the most powerful boundaries weren't the ones you enforce, but the ones others create for themselves? The greatest strategists throughout history understood that visible barriers create opposition, but invisible architecture shapes behavior without resistance. They knew that the most effective constraints are the ones people believe they've chosen freely. This brings us to strategy number 5 of 5, the boundary inversion principle. Rather than setting rigid boundaries that others will inevitably test, this approach creates flexible boundaries that subtly encourage others to establish their own limitations. The genius of this method is that when people voluntarily restrict themselves based on assumptions about your expectations, they essentially build their own cages. This self-imprisonment happens without resistance because it feels self-directed, yet the architecture of their constraints was invisibly designed by you. For example, instead of explicitly telling a team member they can't contact you after hours, a boundary they might test or resent, you might mention how much you value your evening family time while consistently responding to truly urgent matters. Without ever stating a rule, most people will begin to categorize their requests more carefully, creating their own internal boundary about what justifies interrupting your evening. Or perhaps you're negotiating with someone who tends to make excessive demands. Rather than firmly stating your limits, which creates a target for them to push against, you might express appreciation for reasonable requests while responding with decreasing enthusiasm to each escalation. They'll likely establish their own stopping point as they sense the diminishing returns of continued pushing. The boundary inversion principle works because it leverages a psychological truth. People value and protect what they perceive as their own decisions. A boundary they've constructed feels like freedom rather than constraint, even when it serves exactly the same function as a rule you might have imposed. To implement this strategy effectively, you must first understand how self-limitation works. People naturally establish boundaries based on several factors: their perception of social norms, their desire for reciprocity, their need for approval, and their assessment of potential consequences. By subtly influencing these factors rather than creating explicit rules, you shape the invisible architecture within which others make independent choices about their behavior. The beauty of this approach is that people rarely resist or resent boundaries they believe they've established themselves. This technique requires patience and subtlety. You must resist the temptation to explicitly state limitations, even when violations occur. Instead, use consistent patterns of response to teach others where the invisible lines exist. Reward respect for unstated boundaries with approval, access, and positive engagement. Meet boundary violations not with enforcement, but with natural consequences that feel disconnected from any rules. The boundary inversion principle transforms relationship dynamics. Instead of positioning yourself as the enforcer of limitations, a role that often triggers resistance, you become the creator of contexts within which others naturally regulate their own behavior. Their self-regulation becomes more reliable than any enforcement you could implement because it's driven by internal motivation rather than external pressure. Remember that this strategy isn't about manipulation or control. It's about creating healthy dynamics through natural human psychology rather than arbitrary rules. The boundaries people create for themselves are often more reasonable and more respected than those imposed upon them. By mastering the boundary inversion principle, you'll never again need to fight the exhausting battle of boundary enforcement. Instead, you'll create environments where others naturally establish and maintain the very limitations that benefit your position and priorities. As we've explored these 5 strategies, the mirror maze technique, the pressure release valve strategy, the empty stage method, the confirmation coin flip, and the boundary inversion principle, you've gained insight into the subtle art of strategic positioning that Machiavelli himself would admire. These approaches aren't about direct confrontation or manipulation. They're about understanding human nature so deeply that you can create conditions where others either grow or reveal their limitations through their own choices and actions. Remember that with this knowledge comes responsibility. The true master of strategy doesn't seek to destroy others unnecessarily, but rather to create clarity, revealing people as they truly are, not as they pretend to be. Sometimes this revelation leads to their growth, and sometimes to their self-destruction, but either outcome serves truth. By implementing these techniques in your personal and professional life, you'll find yourself fighting fewer battles while winning more wars. You'll conserve your energy while gaining unprecedented insight into those around you. Most importantly, you'll develop the strategic patience that has characterized history's most effective leaders. The art of making others destroy themselves isn't about malice, it's about mastery of the human condition. Use it wisely. The next video the algorithm chose for you isn't random. It's your next tactical upgrade. Click it now and continue your silent ascent. Those who hesitate lose influence.